No stress, huh?
No.
Okay, I have a notice saying it's live.
All I had to do is change the name, huh?
Who are we now?
Huh. Yep, seems to be working.
All right.
That's very exciting.
Thanks
Welcome, everybody.
for joining us. If anyone's still left in the chat room.
All right. If you're still here, you passed the test. Good work.
Yes. Yes. Now you can move on to actually getting to watch this episode. So welcome, everybody, to Monster Talk Live. I'm Matthew Baxter, and I'm really happy to be here with my two co-hosts and founders of the show. Blake, would you like to introduce
Blake
yourself?
Smith. Hi, I'm Blake Smith of Monster Talk. So how old
Hi, I'm
are you
Karen
all doing?
Stolzno,
Yeah.
and I thought you'd stop talking. This is what it's like recording the audio version of the show as well.
It is.
But yeah, we just to introduce the topic that we'll be talking about tonight. I'm just going to read a little meme which was posted to Monster Talk a couple of days ago from Greg Assordian. I think he's a friend of yours, Blake.
That's right. Yeah.
Friend of the show.
Greg Asdorian.
Yeah.
Yep.
Asdorian. And so he posted, date someone that loves you no matter what your body looks like. Date someone that understands that your body may change over time. Date someone that knows you can't control how quickly you morph into a werewolf under the light of a full moon. Date someone that loves you for you. So yes, we're going to be talking about werewolves tonight by popular request.
Excellent.
Well, this should be fun. I guess I'll start off.
Yeah, I think we're going to go in order, kind of linear time order again. So
or something of that nature.
Yeah.
So I was going to talk about the Werewolf of Bedburg. This is Peter Stump, or Peter Stube, or Peter Stumpf, depending on who you ask or what you read. Now, this is an interesting story. This guy was around in the 1580s is kind of when most of this happened for him, and he was accused of being this vicious werewolf. Now, originally he was this well-respected farmer in Bedburg, Germany, and he was a widower, had two children, although they seemed to be a little far apart in age. He had an older daughter and a younger son. And at the time, there was a werewolf craze that was just sweeping the countryside. So if something could be blamed on a werewolf, it would be, basically. Now, the main source for this story was this pamphlet that was printed several years after his execution. And there are no original copies of it left in German. There are two copies of the English translation of it, and that is it. But a pamphlet, I mean, how much can you rely on the accuracy of that?
So did he go through, he went through a trial, a legal trial? You'd think there would be records.
A legal trial.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, really, the records and everything were destroyed in, what was it, the 10-year war? I can't remember what the
It's not about monsters. I don't really know what.
Yeah. History, what?
Not too sure.
But yeah, there was a war around that time. I can't remember which one, but the records were pretty much destroyed and burned.
Which
so
always seems to be the case with a lot of mysteries, that the records are destroyed in a fire or a flood or something.
Yes. So when there's no proof for a werewolf, we can pretty much guess that there was no werewolf.
Hey, now,
but
I saw the woodcuts. How can you?
Yeah,
explain
I know.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert. Sorry, that was way too soon for me to let that out. But no, the thing is Peter Stumpf probably wasn't his real name anyway. It was probably a nickname. His left hand had actually gotten removed in a farming accident.
Oh.
As far as we know, this is the whole thought. So Stump.
And that's why, really?
Yeah. Stump was actually. Well, because his name. Let me see if I can find his name here. Says his real name was likely Abel Griswold, and Griswold
is no vacation.
Right, well, it's true.
Yeah.
But I think if you're going to have a good werewolf name, I think Griswold is a great werewolf name.
Yeah.
So it's a good, reliable.
So
werewolf
he
name.
was pretty much named after his
injury.
his injury.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So and which is an interesting thing. Let me share my.
I didn't know
screen
that
here
was a
real quick.
convention, but
Well, anything can be, I guess.
Lucky, Tiny, Little John,
So this wonderful illustration is inaccurate because he's got both his hands.
This is a photograph. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a real photograph. And then this one, the wolf has both his paws. But later on, the story became that this person beat off the wolf. That didn't come out right.
Hey-o.
He pushed the wolf. He got rid of the wolf, and noticed that the wolf only had one front paw, was missing his left front paw, and then chased it, and then Peter Stump come out of the bushes, with his hand missing and everything. So there's lots of different variations of it, and we don't know which one of them could be real. I don't want to focus on this woodcut too much because it's pretty gruesome. But the bottom line is, well, the bottom line is the hand is missing in every shot of him.
So is that a kind of common recurring theme in werewolf lore, where when the person transforms into a werewolf, that they're somehow injured or affected in the way that the man is?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's so common in all the lore stories,
Okay.
And it also is true in witch lore, where you would shoot the witch in the leg, and then
Witch lore?
Witch lore, yes, exactly, that lore. But like you would shoot a hare, like not a hair, but like the rabbit-looking thing.
A rabbit.
You'd shoot the hare in the leg, like the right leg, and then the old woman that nobody likes she'll be walking with a limp. It'll turn out she was injured in the same spot. Same thing with werewolves, same exact thing.
It's a kind of folkloric evidence.
You cut off the paw of the wolf, and you got the paw, you put it in a bag, and then you go to tell your uncle, and then he comes to the door with a bandage around his arm, that kind of thing. So yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the poor guy, he was Protestant, and the Catholic Church was at this point was really looking to punish anyone that was non-Catholic and kind of make an example out of them. And so he became, from being this well-respected farmer, he now was accused of all these horrible crimes, which we don't even know if any of the crimes even took place. There's no records to even say that any children were eaten, any adults were eaten, or animals, any of this, all the stuff he was accused of. We don't actually know if any of it actually even took place, like maybe an actual wolf did something, but we simply don't know. It's all up in the air. But the thing is the Catholic Church was going to pin this on him, and that's all there was to it. So under some incredible torture, he confessed to a whole lot of stuff. And
as they did.
Yeah, so you really can't rely on confessions from torture. But it says here that he confessed to having practiced black magic since he was 12. He claimed that the devil had given him a magical belt, and we know all about those, which enabled him to metamorphosize into the likeness of a greedy, devouring wolf, strong and mighty, with eyes great and large, which in the night sparkled like fire, a mouth great and wide, with most sharp and cruel teeth, a huge body and mighty paws. Now, I'm guessing that that's probably not a direct quote from him, because as he was being tortured, I don't think he was able to put together something quite so poetic.
Yeah.
I think they asked a lot of leading questions and
bleeding questions.
Yes.
Bleeding.
Yeah.
Horrible. Because all the torture and that kind of thing, I mean, whether this actually happened on any level or not, absolutely torture. And I mean, this is right around the time of the Spanish Inquisition too, right? And I mean, these things definitely did happen, and forced confessions under torture. And so it's tragic stuff.
My understanding is that the as bad as the witch trials were, a lot of the torture related to the werewolf trials, of which there were quite a few, was even more brutal. Yeah.
His daughter and his mistress, who he supposedly was having a relationship with, an incestuous relationship with both of them, because his mistress was supposedly a distant relative, and that was close enough for the Catholic Church to consider it incestuous.
There were a lot of similar claims to that around that time. I mean, just going back to, this is indirectly related, but the time of Henry VIII, where he was claiming that his second wife, Anne Boleyn, when he was trying to get rid of her, that she was having an incestuous relationship with her brother. So I think a lot of these kinds of claims and stories were around and diffusing, I guess, across Europe.
Absolutely. It's a pity. I mean, the thing is from there, they got burned as witches, and alongside his corpse getting burned, because they chopped off his head and everything, and then they burned him, and then they burned them alongside him. And it was just gruesome. Yeah, it's a pretty ugly story. And a lot of people still believe that it's true. Not that he was a werewolf, but that he was basically a serial killer. And that makes me wonder, if someone were a serial killer back then, would they just simply be dubbed a werewolf? Would that, is that pretty much the same thing? I mean, the thing is they made him really savage. In all the confessions and everything, he was, just bloodthirsty and drooling and gnashing of teeth and everything. But serial killers, as we kind of know them today, other than maybe like Ramirez, the Night Stalker, he would definitely be a werewolf in these ancient times. But someone like, Ted Bundy, would John Wayne Gacy? I mean, they try to be clever and try to charm people, and that's almost more of a vampire kind of quality, I would think.
Yeah, I guess we look at things through the lens of our own time and our experiences and our understanding of the world, and so that's an interesting theory.
It is. It's intriguing. I didn't know about the hand being cut off in the lore. This does sound suddenly a lot more like folklore than fact. So that's fascinating. I did so.
Or was that a punishment for something? I mean, if he did indeed exist, and that's
what
the
Blake
biggest
does
question
to us.
for...
What Blake does to us is punishment.
Remember when we talked about Sonny Bean, and that like all the stories of Sonny Bean came down to like one story that had been repeated multiple times,
and that there was no evidence.
And there was no evidence of it. So it's like, oh, that's.
And if you want more information on that, that is our Based on a True Story episode of The Hills Have Eyes.
Yeah.
Nice plug. But it is intriguing. Now I need to go read more, because I've always looked at the woodcutting and thought, well, I'm glad I wasn't a werewolf back then, because that looks terrible.
Yeah, better to be a werewolf today, right? Like
no, today now the world is much more accepting. So
now is the time. Yeah.
So absolutely.
I totally agree.
We're moving on to my story. Then,
absolutely, yes. I don't know that much more pleasant can be said about poor Peter. So let's.
So was it a true story or not? We're stumped. All right, continue.
Yeah.
There's some more of that punishment.
So you were saying that this the story of Peter Stump, that took place around the 1580s.
Yes.
So it seems like, I guess, if this is folklore too, that it was just diffusing and spreading around Europe at that time, because my story goes back to the early 17th century, so about 1603. So I guess that stories of werewolves were all the rage at this time. I think it's interesting too that a lot of the stories come from Europe, especially France. There seem to be a lot of French werewolves in particular. And so the case I was going to talk about is a fellow named Jean Grenier. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with him at all. But this story,
those old French werewolves, they garoo on you.
Yeah. So yes, you do. It's
ow.
You have the loup garou. You have these other werewolves and similar characters. It seems like there was an epidemic at that time. So this story, I first came across it in one of my Usborne books. So this one's Vampires, Werewolves, and Demons. And I think, Blake, you described this as the the gift that keeps on giving.
It does.
So here's the story here, some pictures from this particular tale. So
Together
it took place
I'm going to put those up real quick.
Great.
Yeah, nice. Yeah.
So the story, 1603, and here it says 1604. So again, you've got with folklore, just different years. But so it took place in southwestern France. And so apparently in this little village, a lot of children were disappearing and dogs were disappearing too, from farms, and shepherds were being attacked. And then there was a young girl, a 13-year-old girl, and she claimed that she'd been attacked by the light of the full moon by a savage wolf. And that wolf turned out to be Jean Grenier, who's either, depending on what source you read, he's either 12 or he's 13 or he's 14 years of age. And so he confessed to this attack, and he also confessed to the murder of some 50 children, I think, in the area. And so he was arrested, and he was brought to trial, and he admitted that he was a werewolf. So you can show up the next picture too, if you want.
Awesome.
So I've always loved these pictures.
Oh no, the art's fantastic. Yeah, it looks straight out of a Hammer movie. You know,
that just really haunted me as a kid. Just the images of him eating raw meat, and the one of him being strapped up in the court as well. He's got that kind of toothy look. It's like that meme of that little girl sitting in the back seat of the car, I think.
The side eye.
So he claimed that a lord of the forest, who's also mentioned as being named Pierre, that he had given him a magic wolf skin and some kind of ointment, like a lot of the other stories from this time that we're familiar with, and that had turned him into a werewolf. And that he'd been roaming the forest and killing children and killing dogs, eating dogs for at least 3 years. So he said that little girls were the most tasty as well, that except for their arms and shoulders. So again, when you start hearing things like this, it just sounds like add-ons to the story after it's been told many, many times.
Yeah.
So anyway, he claims that he was living in the forest, and that he was sharing food with wolves as well, and that when he was in his human form, he'd spoken with shepherds, and he'd said that he was the son of a priest. So I think, Matt, you've said to me that saying that someone's the bastard son of a priest, isn't that some kind of...
Yeah, they were supposed to often have powers. So children of the clergy, especially if they were illegitimate, that they would often have powers. And very strange belief.
Isn't that how the song goes? The only one who could ever creature me was the son of a preacher man. Was that not?
Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah.
So yeah, he was described as being very thin and very dirty with matted hair, and that he had teeth and nails like an animal, and wild, ferocious eyes.
So teenagers, what I keep hearing. What are you saying? What?
And that he ate raw meat, and he ran around on all fours, that kind of thing. So anyway, apparently when he was brought before this judge, he diagnosed, I think they had a doctor or something who diagnosed him as suffering from lycanthropy, and that all of his accounts, him talking about being a werewolf, that these were all supported by witnesses and by victims as well. But for some reason, the judge spared his life. And I think that that's strange. If you truly had that many deaths, livestock disappearing, children disappearing, I really doubt that a judge would be that lenient, but that's how the story goes anyway. So he was sentenced to life to live in a monastery in Bordeaux. And apparently he continued to live out his animalistic behavior there, and the judge visited him there maybe 7 years afterwards, and that he was less wild, but he was still claiming that he was a werewolf. So it said that he died at about age 20. So I guess with this story, what really happens, and did it happen at all? I don't know if there are any records. It seems like a lot of this is folklore. Is there some kind of cautionary tale here about cannibalism, some kind of religious tale? And again, were these confessions forced in any way, if he did indeed exist? And a lot of the accounts here, like as you can see in the book, Jean was so dull and idiotic that any child half his age had more sense. So I'm just wondering if he did exist, was he suffering from some kind of intellectual disability that was construed to be some kind of supernatural power or ability? But this also made me think of wild children, and I'm sure Blake's going to make another joke here now. Insert joke here. But we read of stories of wild children and feral children that are raised by wolves. And I think a very famous story is one of Victor of Aveyron. Ugh, I've got a cold and it's difficult to get
Bless
out.
you.
Thank you. So another French feral child, wild child, and he was born around 1788.
Is this his picture?
This is a photograph.
He doesn't look that dangerous without anything below his like upper chest, I think, you know.
Maybe, yeah. It looks like he's got some scratches or something on his face.
Well, that's how he has to pull himself along, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so.
So cases like this are of great interest to developmental psychologists and to linguists in looking at first language acquisition, language development in children. And so in the case of Victor, he was about 12 years old, and it's said that he ran away from home because his parents were alcoholics and he was the victim of abuse in the home. And so he was just living in the forest and living with the wolves, living with other creatures in the forest and eating like they did and living like they did. And that when he was brought back into society, he kept escaping again and returning to the woods, and he didn't want to be a part of civilization. And so from the records, and there are records in this case, it appears that he didn't learn language, or he never learnt it properly in the way that we typically do. And there's a more recent case, the case of Jeannie. I'm not sure if either of you are familiar with. Here she is here at the age of 13. It's a very sad case. When she was about 2 years old, her father thought that she had an intellectual disability. So he did exactly what you would do. He strapped her into a potty and just kept her in an outhouse until she was 13. Barely fed her. She was malnourished, didn't speak to her. So when she was discovered, this was in Los Angeles. And when she was finally discovered by a social worker, so this is going back to the 1950s, when she was finally discovered, she was strapped to a potty and naked, wearing a diaper, and just covered in scars and scratches, and was in a horrible, horrible state. And very sadly, the only things that she could do, she could say no, which I think is very indicative of what she went through. And she could bark like a dog as well. So she was taken into care. And the father did all of this. I'm not quite sure of what happened with the mother. I think she eventually took back custody of her. But she was of great interest, again, to linguists and academia to find out what happens with first language acquisition if you don't have proper exposure to language. There are theories about a critical period hypothesis is what it's called, where a lot of academics think that if you don't learn language by a certain age, that you'll never learn it properly. But it's kind of hard to figure out in these cases, is this nature or is this nurture? Because these poor kids are abused and they're not going through a normal development. And I think we see that not only with Jeannie, but we see that with Victor, and that might be the case with Jean too. It seems like he wasn't the wasn't the bastard son of a priest, but did have a father who in accounts he's named Pierre, and that he was abusive to Jean. So if that's true, that kind of does fit in with the story in these other cases.
I know that you've got the really ugly psychology experiments of taking away certain things, from children, or whether it's with monkeys or whatever, taking away any kind of affection or love or warmth will create a kind of a vicious animal. And is that kind of what we're seeing here?
Well, it's just hard to say. I mean, with the Jeannie case, that's the most recent, but with the case of Victor, we're going back hundreds of years. Just how accurate are things? And with Jean, going back even further, there was a very informal experiment which was performed, I think, by an Egyptian pharaoh who I think could have been Babylonian, who cast out a couple of children into the wilderness and then left them there for some period of time. No one could, I think they were fed and taken care of, but they weren't spoken to. And under these conditions, apparently they were saying the word bread in Akkadian or whatever language it was in. But it seems like that probably would have been more babbling, I think. I mean,
it's
you've got cases,
Babylon.
You've certainly got cases too of deaf children and learning language. And it just seems like, well, the theory is anyway, that there's this kind of window for learning language, whether it's sign language or verbal language, any kind of language. And if you don't learn it up to a certain point, then you'll never learn it properly. And it seems like with Jean too, in some cases anyway, that he didn't have much language or he couldn't communicate very well. Again, that he was dull or dim-witted. So I think that kind of fits in anyway with that theory.
We've looked at it lightly on the show, this abandoned children or wild child sort of story, and almost always there's elements there that make you suspect that they weren't abandoned too young, but that maybe they were abandoned after they had developed, or like it was clear they had developmental issues. And so it seems like,
well,
whether it's
even in the
autism
case of Jeannie,
I'm
not too sure. And then the lines of everything's blurred by the time that you have the child to actually study and research. But in her case, I think she was, I don't know at what point she was 2, but certainly a lot of children are starting to develop language at about 18 months. So yeah, there could have been some exposure to language. And in the case with Victor as well, he had alcoholic parents. I'm sure he had some exposure to language, but I don't know how useful that kind of language would have been. And in Jeannie's case, to pick up a word like no, it seems like a kind of protective thing that she picked up. And but yeah, these are all just very non-standard cases. So what we can glean from them is a lot, but very little at the same time too, because they're just so unusual.
Mowgli seemed to turn out okay.
Yeah, but that's actually what I was thinking about, was like there's cases in India that are people think children raised by wolves or animals, and but the real cases, it seems more likely that they were people there were children who were abandoned when they were a little older.
Away even.
Yeah, and they were living on the edge of society. They weren't like out in the jungle. They were like, right there close enough to steal trash or be fed by caring people.
Probably more realistically, yeah.
So
then we have Romulus and Remus going back, to pre-Roman
at the neutral
times.
Zone, exactly.
But exactly, yeah.
Exactly. I was born in Rome, Georgia, and it's the sister city to Rome, Italy. And so during, I think, the 30s, Mussolini gave them a really lovely bronze statue of the mother wolf and the 2 children suckling from the wolf. So
that's interesting.
They're still proud of it. So yeah.
Well, yeah, it's an interesting story. I mean,
either that or they just love fascism. I don't know. It's hard to say.
Bit of both.
Yeah. But yeah, that these wild children would kind of found Rome is an interesting thing, or at least Romulus did, because he murdered his brother. After he went through all that effort to free him.
These stories do continually pop up, and there are kind of parallels to all of them. So it's very likely that there's something there, some kind of grain of truth.
Well, actually, that leads into what I wanted to talk about, which is werewolves, folklore versus film lore, which I thought we should kick off with that very famous ancient poem. Even a man who is pure in heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the wolfsbane blooms and the autumn moon is bright. And that was an ancient poem from 1941.
Ancient.
That was from the movie The Wolf Man, which was written by a guy named Kurt Siodmak. And
look at that makeup.
Yeah. So
boot polish there.
We'll just leave that up for while I talk about this. So in folklore, I have a few questions, like how does one become a werewolf? And so it turns out that there are lots and lots of ways to become a werewolf. So one way is to be the seventh son of a seventh son.
Forgot about that one.
Yeah, that's a good one. More common back when people used to have 12 to 15 children. And you can drink from the paw print of a wolf. You one that has come up in the stories we've talked about already tonight. You can deliberately conduct a magical ceremony, rubbing a magic salve on yourself while wearing a wolfskin belt. And that was part of the Peter Stumpf story. And it was also part of some of the other stories. You saw wolfskins being applied in those illustrations. Some people believe just sleeping out in the wild overnight could cause it. One way you don't typically hear of, though, in folklore is by being bitten by a werewolf. That's actually not much. I didn't really run into any like legitimate folklore around that. But in the short stories of Robert E. Howard, the guy that created Conan and Solomon Kane, he wrote several influential werewolf stories that included curses. And I am suspicious about whether maybe Kurt Siodmak had possibly read Robert E. Howard. I'm not sure if that's been documented anywhere. But he did have one story where he talked about if you kill a werewolf and it is not fully transformed into a wolf, that it will come back. That won't be the end of it. Like the wolf spirit will bring it back. He wrote a story in 1926 and called Wolf's Head. And that is the first indication that I ever saw in fiction or anywhere that a werewolf changes based on the moon or the lunar cycle. Again, that happens in the movies all the time, but it's not really a part of folklore that I could find. In fact, after the original, if you notice the end of the Wolfman poem, it says, may become a wolf when the wolfsbane blooms and the autumn moon is bright. But later on, they changed it to when the moon is full and bright to kind of tighten it down to it was a lunar relationship that was causing it. Now, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, it doesn't make sense it just doesn't make sense. I mean, if the light of the moon is just the light from the sun being bounced off the moon. So I'm not sure why that would have anything to do with whether someone could or would change into a wolf. But, it's also kind of weird to now in our incredibly enlightened time of science. It's weird to think of somebody changing from one species into another anyway. But if you were curious and wanted to know how to spot a werewolf, can you throw up that next picture? Yeah. So first things first, this is a real giveaway, unibrow. A big old giant hairy caterpillar across the front of the face.
I know tons of werewolves.
Yeah. You're talking to one right now. Yeah, so I have to shave mine daily. It's like weird. Don't
give away your secrets, Blake.
Yeah, I'm covered with hair everywhere, but make sure this is shaved. Yeah. So if you have your index finger is longer than your middle finger, or in some cases, if your ring finger is longer than your middle finger, that's a sign. If you love or crave raw meat, here's a giveaway. If you're in a village and somebody is murdering and tearing people or livestock apart, if the next morning people seem very tired and sluggish, maybe a little bloated, they may be full of meat. That may be why, because they might be a werewolf. Like
what? No, my hands, my middle finger's longer, so yeah. I'm good.
The classic one, though, we actually talked about in so many stories, is that someone injures the werewolf, and then later that townsperson is found with a similar injury. A missing hand or a foot after they've torn off the paw of a wolf is a really common trope in those stories. So now that you know how to spot a werewolf, how do you stop a werewolf? Now, I know movies have taught us that you need to use a silver bullet, but if you've listened to Monster Talk for a while, we've done a lot of research around silver bullets, especially around the case of the Beast of Gévaudan.
More than anyone should.
Yeah, well, more than anyone should. But ultimately, you don't get silver bullets being a guaranteed kill on a werewolf until after the Wolfman movie. Is in the best of my research. The Wolfman movie itself doesn't even have a silver bullet. Spoiler, the movie's from 1941. You should have seen it by now. In that movie, the werewolf, or the Wolfman, Lyle Talbot is, or Larry Talbot is beaten to death by his father, who is wielding a silver-headed cane. So that in that movie, it's just a piece of silver bludgeoning the son to death, kills him. But in folklore, you could kill a wolf in a lot more ways. You could chop off its head, you could burn it, you could use a blessed bullet.
So kind of very similar to vampire lore as well.
It is, and just like in vampire lore, there's way more ways to become a vampire than just being bit by a vampire. And there's way more ways to kill a vampire than just a wooden stake. Exactly.
So would you say that that first movie, the Wolfman, kind of changed it from being an active thing that you participated in to becoming a curse?
Yes, I think that's a real strong indication. Let's go to the flower slide. Because you did mention the first werewolf movie being the Wolfman, but that's technically not accurate.
Well,
yeah,
the big one.
The Werewolf of London came out before that. And in that movie, the werewolf was turned into a wolf by eating some kind of plant in Tibet, or running into a wolf in Tibet. He ran into another wolf in Tibet and ended up like with this curse. And the flowers had to do with stopping him from changing into a wolf, if I'm remembering correctly. I'm suddenly blanking. But this is wolfsbane. And they call it wolfsbane, and it shows up in all kinds of werewolf movies. But it is not an herb or a flower or a plant you want to mess with. It's extremely toxic. And it's believed that the reason it's called wolfsbane is because it was used to poison wolves. Like you would put this into some meat and leave it out for the wolves to eat, and then they would die. So it's little to do with werewolves. But
wasn't belladonna also used in some of the rituals?
Now, belladonna was used in the rituals in the salve, allegedly, and it's supposed to have some hallucinatory effects when rubbed on your body. Most of the formulas have a lot of things that you can't easily buy now because they're controlled or toxic.
Damn.
I think when we did our first coverage of werewolves, I called a magic supply shop and tried to order the potion stuff I needed. And they wouldn't sell me any of it.
They called the police. Yeah.
Well, they didn't call the police, but they definitely couldn't get me any of my supplies. They were all things that you wouldn't want to consume or rub on your body.
You can't wander around the backwoods of Georgia and find a lot of the stuff.
Sorry, I couldn't quite make that out. Sorry. What?
Go ahead, Karen.
Oh, I just said that doesn't sound good. You saying I couldn't get my supplies, man.
Yeah. No. I'm stuck in this form apparently. So now we did mention that the full moon is not actually part of traditional werewolf lore. Again, it creeps into the fiction in the 20s and 30s. But there is. I'm getting a really cool thunderstorm out here. It's really nice mood.
Oh, there's some rain here as well.
Yeah. So there are a lot of myths around the moon having effects on people, though. And this concept of lunacy, that word comes from the idea that full moons or moons can make you act weird. Yeah. We've discussed this before. It's worth mentioning again that it is not real. It's a statistical effect. It's the sort of confirmation bias that people who work in hospitals and law enforcement, they pay attention when the moon's full. They expect it to be crazy, so everything seems more crazy. But mathematically, it turns out there's no additional weirdness around full moons. One other thing around werewolves and science is that I think we've had Brian Regal on one of his first episodes. We talked about this idea of how Charles Darwin effectively killed the werewolf, because by giving us a mechanism for describing how everything's related to everything else, and then all the advancements that's piled up to support the idea that we're all related, we all have DNA, and that it's variations in DNA that make us what we are, then the idea of swapping from one species to another suddenly started seeming like a ridiculous old-fashioned magic idea, and it just sort of lost its cachet. I would argue that magical thinking seems to be having a real resurgence lately. People are looking for things like the dog man. And if you can believe that there's an upright dog man that's part human, part man, then a wolf man is nothing, that's a small leap.
Do you think this has got, when you're talking about of late, do you think this has anything to do with the pandemic and People
I mean,
more
no,
superstitious.
this in the 2000s, like into this 21st century, there's been a lot of stuff around Dogman coming out of Michigan and Wisconsin, and I don't think it's tied to any particular thing, except that an overall trend in America to pushing back and wanting to have magical things. Honestly, it's an annoying topic. It's like we on the show, we want to promote critical thinking and scientific based evidence thinking, and we love monsters. But unfortunately, I feel like a lot of the stuff that's going on with magical thinking and believing that monsters are real in the absence of evidence is also closely tied to a lot of really nasty politics and stuff. And I don't want to get into that tonight anyway. I mean, I think it's probably worth talking about at some point, but not. Sure. It still feels a little raw. There's nobody that has like a corner on critical thinking. Everybody, reality shouldn't be political. Reality should be everyone's core value. And my personal belief is, if you can't support your ideas with evidence and science and facts, maybe your ideas aren't that great. But that's just me.
Speaking of evidence, science, and facts, I want to talk about Marvel Comics just for a quick second.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah, because they're always very based in that. Now, Blake, are you consider yourself a pretty big Marvel Comics fan?
I don't know. Are you about to ask me about the son of J. Jonah Jameson going to the moon and becoming some sort of wolf creature?
Oh my God, you were psychic. Oh my God. the man wolf. Yes, the man wolf.
That was just a guess, but yes.
No, that was beautiful.
A wild guess.
That was so well done. Because there are other things that could be connected to Marvel Comics that don't necessarily have to be that. But yeah, that was an interesting thing because that was connected to the moon as well.
It was,
because he found that little moon rock and he made a pendant out of it and it grafted itself to his skin. And now when the moon was bright, he turned into the man wolf, which is really an original name.
Yeah. It's like, but if you named a comic book Man Spider, you'd get sued by Marvel.
Good point.
I know we're running a little late. Let's go to the next slide. 1981 was a magical year. It was the year we had two of the most awesomest werewolf movies ever. So in that one year, we got American Werewolf in London, and that had special effects by Rick Baker. And then we also got, next slide.
Working on it.
Possibly. The Howling, which was going to have special effects by Rick Baker, but ended up getting, Rick had to go work on American Werewolf in London. And so Rob Bottin took over the effects on The Howling. And Rob Bottin is the guy who did the awesome special effects for John Carpenter's The Thing. And I really like both movies. The American Werewolf in London has a very personal, special place for me and my wife because as she likes to say, it was the first movie we watched together. I like to say it was the second one, but that's a different. That's one of those. False memories. I'm sure I'm wrong. Okay.
Yes, you are wrong.
But both of these movies were really plugged into a lot of werewolf tropes. They made a lot of movie references and folklore references. American Werewolf in London had a tremendous soundtrack, great special effects, and really it felt like a really solid, scary werewolf movie with some comedy in it. And The Howling also has some comedy in it, but The Howling has some actual more nods to the actual folklore. So if we go to the next slide. Not that one. Sorry, that's Rick Baker doing the makeup work, though. That's a good slide. Good slide. So there we go. This is a screenshot from The Howling, and it might not be easy to tell here. What's happening is two reporters are going into the apartment of, I think his name was Quist, something Quist. It was the serial killer from the first of the movie, little segment. And while they're exploring his apartment, they see this table, and they don't really make a big deal about it, but on the table are bottles of herbs, clearly magical accoutrement, and a wolf skin belt. So they never say he wore these things or used them to transform, but it's like all the folklore stuff's right there. It's so
got
beautiful.
a nice nod.
It really is. And generally speaking, I would say the thing about werewolves is most of the time, until you get into the movies, most werewolves are evil. But I know we're running out of time, but I'm just going to say I want to tell you about my favorite werewolf really quickly. This is the Werewolf of Livonia. This is a guy named Thijs of Kaltenbrunn. Okay. So the time is 1692. The place, Livonia. Now you may be wondering where that is. I was. It turns out that Sweden used to own a big chunk of Latvia and Estonia. And so at that time, it was called Livonia, and a lot of the cities had different names, but that was actually the region we're talking about. So this is south of, it's a little bit west of Russia and north of Poland, and in that little zone right there.
Okay.
And there was some theft going on. Somebody was stealing from the church. They were like trying to find out. And they were asking people about if they knew anything about the thieving. And they brought in this guy, Thijs of Kaltenbrunn, to ask him about it. And instead of like answering their questions, he starts explaining that he was a werewolf and that, he was a good werewolf and he had powers and he did things and he fought witches and chased them into hell and, that kind of thing. And they were like, you're a crazy person. Like, you're 80 years old. You didn't do any of those things. And he was like, I did do those things because I'm a werewolf and werewolves are good. And so I'm overly simplifying this, but it's a really great story. We'll have to cover this in more detail later when we have more time. But basically, he claimed as an 80-year-old man, he used to regularly drive the witches into hell, torment the sinners, and that werewolves were the hounds of God, which I just love. And they didn't kill him. They didn't torture him. They didn't beat him to death. They didn't do any of those things. They were like, you aren't right. You stop that. It's like, he just, it seemed like everybody was like, maybe he was just a local person with like a lot of character and color. I don't know. Maybe he was 80 years old in the 1690s and said, what have I got to lose? Clearly had not read any of the Peter Stump brochures. So
well, sometimes historically you did have someone, I mean, it's not a PC term today, but a village idiot or people who were seen as being touched in some way, or who were well beloved by the community and embraced by them and protected by them. So
he was definitely colorful. I first read about him in I think it was in the book The Witch, and I'm drawing a blank right now, but they talked about, it was in the Night Battles, about witchcraft and agrarian cults in the 16th century, by Carlo Ginzburg. That's who it was. That's where I read about it. So there's a Wikipedia article you can look at. We'll put that in the show notes, but maybe we'll cover that in more detail because it really is a peculiar story. It really falls outside a lot of the rest of the wolf lore, but it's happening in Europe, and and I think because it doesn't end in horrible murder, death, and pain, it's kind of a happy story. I really like it.
Happy werewolf. Well, I wanted to point out just a couple of little things. That picture that you had of the guy with the unibrow. Yeah, that was from a movie called A Company of Wolves, and that's one of my favorite werewolf movies.
That's a great one. Yeah,
and it's kind of a cult classic. It's not all that well known, but it's a retelling basically of Little Red Riding Hood.
And other stories. It's got several wolf stories in it. Yeah, and they're all the presentation. It feels almost like an Italian horror movie. Like sometimes you can tell it's on a set. It feels like a dream. Yes. It's got sort of the same design aesthetic as maybe Legends. With it's got that same sort of. You feel like you're on a set. But I don't know, it's good. I like it. I like the music. I like Angela Lansbury. I love the special effects. Some of the stories are awesome. Some are weird and sad, but I like it a lot. I agree.
Yeah, great movie. Now, one of the werewolves we didn't talk about was the Beast of Joravan. Is that right? And that is another one of my favorites. But I think the real reason we didn't talk about it is because that's also a movie called Brotherhood of the Wolf. And that's going to be based on a true story.
Yeah, we're gonna have fun with that because we've talked about that case a lot because it's one of the best cases where you have a monster and a whole bunch of real corpses. Something happened, so there's a lot to talk about and unpack there.
So that one will be a fun one that will be coming up fairly soon. However, our next based on a true story will be Child's Play, and that's going to be a lot of fun.
We're going to be recording that in a couple of days.
Yeah. So I wanted to mention two other things really quickly. Karen, you were talking about these wild children and first language acquisition. Now, this is something that you actually have written about previously, correct?
I'm not prepared, but a little bit in. You are prepared. In my book, Language, Myths, Mysteries, and Magic. Yes, I talk about that and a lot more. Paranormal and supernatural claims that are connected to language, and there are a lot more of them than you might think. And it's because it was published by Palgrave Macmillan. It's horrendously expensive. Paperback something like $120.
Yikes!
But you can buy a Kindle version too. And I'm hoping at some point
do some crowdfunding to raise the money to buy a copy, or if you can find a place where it actually is, shoplift.
Or libraries will also hook you up. But
libraries, you can shoplift from the library.
Do leave a review or a rating.
Now, did you talk at all about language deacquisition in children at all? Like where when Ariel has her voice stolen by the sea witch?
No, I don't think I mentioned that, but I do talk about Robert the Doll and Chucky, and so in line with our next based on a true story. But that
Ursula,
also brings me to our next Monster Talk Live. So I'm assuming that we'll do another one in June. And we need a topic. So I think we were talking a little bit about maybe curses.
Yeah. I mean, we were talking about the whole werewolf thing, about how it went from being an active thing into a curse. I think that's a great segue into doing, let's talk about curses. What's our favorite curse?
I don't know if there are any suggestions from the
let's ask our listeners if they have any favorite curses.
Yeah.
F you, mother
curse
effer.
Words.
That's a good one. But and also I think that we should mention that we're
that's a razor, not COVID.
Not COVID. Yeah. But even Blake's reaction, you couldn't have done that a year ago. When we first started doing these Zoom meetings a year ago, you had to be very careful not to touch your face.
Yeah.
I still feel like I should be wearing a mask.
You can't do that. And that was
my wife says I should keep wearing one too. That's interesting.
Beautiful.
It's totally unrelated.
Now, this has actually been a lot of work, putting a lot of fun, but a lot of work to get all this put together, to get these things working properly on the technical side, but just the research that's required and everything else for all of these shows. And we're not making any money off of it. So if anybody wants to jump on and become a patron, we'd really appreciate it. Now, Blake, the website for that is at patreon.com/Monster
Talk. That's right.
So it's very complicated.
Yeah.
No one's going to be able to remember that. So
we really do appreciate
I'll put it in the
everyone's
description.
support.
Well, we do have a lovely group over there, and I know some of them are in the chat room here now. So we appreciate all your support.
Thank you so much. In fact, what we should probably be doing in some of these is when we recognize a patron, we should absolutely call them out and make sure that they know that they are a treasured part of the Monster Talk family, because we really do appreciate it.
We should do that. And everyone should check out our obviously the regular podcast, Monster Talk. And we just released a new episode on the Chase Vault, the moving chase coffins of Barbados. And Matt also has his playlist or channel, or part of the Monster Talk channel on YouTube with Ask a Paranormal Investigator. And we're doing lots of things and keeping busy, and really appreciate everyone's support and everyone who's tuning into this and watching it subsequently as well.
We literally couldn't do it without you, or because they won't let me on here without electricity and paying the cable bill. So yeah,
indeed.
Ain't that the truth? All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us tonight.
Thank you for watching.
Yes. And we look forward to seeing you next time on Monster Talk Live. And in the meantime, keep up on the podcast episodes, the Ask a Paranormal Ask a Paranormal Investigator episodes, and the Based on a True Story episodes. So hopefully we're giving you as much monster talk as you can possibly stand. So everybody have a great
slogan.
night. Yes, right. That's our new
Enough logo. Is good for you. The right dosage.
Well, thank you
it's
guys
not all
for
you
joining
want
us.
to eat, it's all you can eat.
Right. Yeah. That's exactly.
So you guys have a great night.
Yeah, we'll see you later.
Talk to you later.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye-bye.
Bye.